What's up YouTube? It's your boy Thomas the Idiot here with a video on the best beginner drift cars and what makes them the best beginner drift cars. If you're looking to get into drifting, the first question you have to answer is, what car should I get? And you might do yourself a quick Google search, find a bunch of articles that talk about the best beginner drift cars. I think a lot of these articles are crap. They're very outdated. They recommend cars that are way too expensive. They recommend cars that need way too much work. So I thought I would put my big brain to the issue and come up with my list of the best beginner drift cars. But before we get into it, let me just list the qualities of the best beginner drift cars. So maybe you find a car that's not on this list that fits these qualities and you want to go ahead and pull the trigger. Well, you'll know what qualities you're looking for in a good beginner drift car. So the first thing you're going to be looking for is a car that's common. You're going to want a car that has a lot of examples to look through when you're looking through Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. You're not going to want to find a car that has like one example within 500 miles because A, that means it's going to be harder to find replacement parts for this car for cheap, and B, if the car sucks and that's the car you want, well, you're going to buy that one that sucks. If there's 50 examples, you're going to at least find one of them that's good. So you're going to want to find a car that's common, not something that's rare. Kind of going off of that, the second thing is you're going to want to find a car that's pretty cheap. Now, I'm not talking $500 cheap because this is going to be your drift car, not your project car. You don't want to buy something that's super, super cheap that you're then going to have to spend, months or years getting running. So you're going to want to find something for about $5,000. If you set yourself with a budget of about $10,000, that leaves you $5,000 for the car, $5,000 for upgrades down the road. That's a lot of money, but not a lot of money when it comes to motorsports. So I think that a $5,000 car is a good starting place. All right, third thing is the car needs to be able to drift stock. This means no major modifications to even get the thing to drift. No subframe modification, no big engine swaps, no drivetrain conversions. I know some of you are gonna be like, but I wanna cut the transfer case off my Subaru and make it rear wheel drive and destroy the resale value. And then if you don't end up liking drifting or you just wanna get rid of the car, it's now worthless. So nothing that requires tons of modifications to even get the thing to be able to drift. A, that's saving you time and money that you can put into, track fees and new tires and stuff. And it's saving you a lot of time, which is also time behind the wheel. And it's also saving your car for your resale. Anytime you do work on your car, you're gonna have to convince the next person that wants to buy it that you did a good job. And if you didn't do a good job, then you can't convince them. And now you're gonna sell the car for 500 bucks when you bought it for $5,000. Not a great idea. The last thing you're going to look for is a car with good aftermarket support. As you and your skills grow at drifting, you're going to want to upgrade this car to maybe get into new leagues that have certain requirements, or just make the car better to handle your new skills. And you're going to want a car that you can plan the future with. A car with a lot of aftermarket support is going to have a lot easier time buying parts, and you're going to have a lot easier time working on it because generally it means that people enjoy working on this car. So you're going to find a lot of videos and articles and forum posts about how to work on the car. So it's just a good idea to find something that has good aftermarket support. Quickly, I just want to go through some cars that people may think should be on this list, or I see that are on a lot of other lists that I don't think belong on a list of best beginner drift cars. The first is the AE86, the Toyota Corolla from the 80s. Real quick, they're too old. It's really underpowered, especially when comparing the cars that you can get now. It's going to be falling apart or in pristine condition and run a huge premium because it's the car from the TV show Initial D. So you're just not going to want to get an AE86. It's just too old to have to worry about all the problems you're going to get yourself into trying to work on this thing. And I think that there are better options now for much cheaper prices. Next are RX-7s. Rotary engine cars are just a huge pain in the ass. You're going to be spending tons of money and time keeping this engine on life support, or you're going to be engine swapping. And those were two things that I said you should not be doing on a car when it's your first beginner drift car. And I see sometimes they recommend the last generation of RX-7, the FD. You're not going to find one of those for less than like 30 grand right now, unless it's in a rolling shell with nothing in it. Not a great idea to try and get an RX-7, especially an FD. It's going to run you so much money. Terrible idea. I don't know why I see it on lists. Next is going to be like any Lexus. The problem is with Lexus is their aftermarket support isn't super massive. Finding them in the United States with manual transmissions is also really difficult because they were luxury cars. And I just think that there are better options that are in similar performance to any Lexus you would want, like an IS 200 or 300 or an SC 300. I think that there are better options available that are very similar. And as much as you think that they're really cool, and they are, I would love an SC300. They're just not a great beginner drift car. Lastly, it's going to be any car not sold in the United States. It's not like I hate cars not sold in the United States. I just don't know about them. I don't know about their price. I don't know, what it takes to work on these cars. So I would just not recommend, if you're from the United States, to buy a car that was never sold in the United States. Like, either import one, especially import one, that's a lot of money, or buy one that has already been imported. It's just, all the parts you're buying for it, you're overnighting from Japan or Germany, wherever the car's from. It's not a great idea. I would just stay away from any cars not sold in the United States. All right, so the first car to make this list is the Ford Mustang SN95, sold from 1993 to 2004. I would stay away from the V6 variants. They're kind of underpowered, but if you do get a V6, they do have okay low-end torque, so they're not that bad, but they come with really great V8 options. These high displacement V8 engines are really nice because, unlike a turbo where you have to keep your revs pinned to the top of your rev range in order to make good power, you get kind of a more linear torque band on a naturally aspirated high displacement engine. So it's gonna be a lot easier to keep making good power regardless of where you are in the rev range. Makes it a lot easier to focus on the other things that you're doing in the car rather than perfect, throttle control. A con on this car is they're pretty heavy. They come in, a few hundred pounds more than some of the other cars on this list that are of similar dimensions. But if you're tearing out the insides and stuff anyway and throwing it around, who really cares? And these things can be had for about $5,000. Not for a great example, like nothing's gonna look pretty, but your first drift car shouldn't look pretty anyway, because it's not going to look pretty after the first few events, I promise you. The other big con is they have a solid rear axle. The first drift car, the A86, like I mentioned earlier, that's really the first true drift car. It also had a solid rear axle, and people love to drift those things, so it's not a huge concern, but it does limit your suspension tuning options. So it is a concern, but not a huge one. But overall, SN95 can be had for a good amount of money. They're gonna have good power if you find the V8 option. They're really common. Some people think they look ugly, so some people just want to get rid of theirs. Overall, just a pretty good car. I know someone who turned an SN95 into a grassroots drift car, and he's having a ton of fun with it. All right, so the next car on this list is always the answer. Miata is always the answer. It's the Mazda Miata NB. I would say the NA, but they're getting a little too old, and I think that the NB kind of took everything that made the NA good and kind of refined it and kind of cut some of the stuff that wasn't so great. If you miss the pop-up headlights on the NA, I feel you, pop-up headlights are cool, but they're unnecessary weight and things that can malfunction and go wrong, and then you might not be able to turn your headlights on while it's night, and that's bad. You get pulled over or something. So I would just stick to an NB, a little bit more refined, a little bit more power. And I think that they're also a little bit more common right now as people are starting to buy the NAs out of nostalgia. They were sold from 1998 to 2005 with a naturally aspirated 1.8 liter dual overhead cam. It's a great engine to start with. It doesn't make great power, but these cars are super lightweight, super small, so they're easy to get sideways, but they can get a little squirrely on you because of their small wheelbase and their lightweight. But I think that they're a great, really beginner car. Maybe not so great as you get higher, up, like you want to get, into the Pro-Am or, Pro 2 series and stuff, but you have plenty of time to learn how to drift on Miata before you need to worry about getting into those leagues. So I think it makes a really great, specifically beginner drift car. These are probably also one of the easiest cars to work on. They're like working on a go-kart. The Miatas are so easy. There's tons of guides online on how to work on these things. The parts are super plentiful. It's really the biggest limiting factor is the size. And it's not going to be the best at handling tons of power through the track, but you don't have to worry about that when you're just beginning drifting. That's something you can worry about on your second or third drift car. So the next car on this list, some people might think belongs higher up on the list. I'm going to place it solidly at third on the list, and that's the Nissan 240SX. This is kind of the drift car. If you know anything about drifting, when you think of a drift car, you're probably thinking of a 240. It's like the most synonymous drift car ever made. But that also is its biggest con, is that people love to turn these things into drift cars. So it suffers from what's called the drift tax. And that's basically because people want to turn these cars into drift cars so much, the prices keep going up. 10 or 15 years ago, these were a super reasonably priced car to turn into any kind of project car. Now, not so much because of the drift tax. So that's why I'm not placing it higher on this list. Really, everything else about the car is very conducive to being a good drift car. It's got a perfectly sized chassis. There's been so much work done to these cars from everyone around the world that finding out how to work on them is going to be super easy. Anything that you could want to do to this car has already been done to this car. So that pretty much means that you're never walking in blind into a scenario. The other kind of biggest con is the engine that came in them is the K24DE. It's a light truck engine, so it's not super powerful, not really tuned for power. Not saying that you can't make power with it, but a lot of people like to swap engines in these, so just make sure you're getting a good swap if somebody's already swapped in an engine. People often swap in the JDM SR20 DET, which is a great engine. Just make sure they swapped it good. It's not a bad engine, but people can mess up their swaps. So just really, this goes for any car you're buying. Just inspect it, make sure everything's working. 240 is one of my favorite cars of all time, and it'd be higher on this list if finding one that wasn't beat or super modified or a hunk of crap or pristine but for way too much money isn't so difficult. These are really kind of getting harder to find, but they would be higher up on the list if they weren't. All right, so the next car on this list is the BMW E36. This is the 3 Series, sold from 1990 to 2000, and it's a great chassis. It really has a lot of similar dimensions as the 240. I think it has a better engine on offer, actually engines. Most of them came with inline sixes ranging from like 2 to 3.3 liters. You really want the M engine. If you can find an M3 E36, that's the best thing that you could find. But a lot of people engine swap these, and because it's the engine that also came in this car, the engine swaps are really easy, so you're not going to be worrying about really bad engine swaps too often. And if you do get the M series engine, you are going to have one of the best engines ever built. If you get one of those under your hood, you have an engine that will last you from grassroots all the way up to like pro drifting. They're getting kind of harder to find right now because people are starting to like move away from the 240s onto the E36s. So that might be a concern, but they're still a lot more plentiful than the 240s. And another con is they are German luxury cars, so sometimes parts in them are starting to fail as they get older. But if you're not trying to like daily drift this thing, and it's really more of a purpose-built drift car, when certain sensors go out and lights turn on in the car, who cares, because you're just taking this thing out to slide around corners. They're really great. They're basically like a 240 but German, and they're not quite as popular, but they're getting there. So if you are going to pick one up, pick it up as soon as possible before these things get really expensive. Now, the number one car that you can get to be your first beginner drift car is the Nissan 350Z. Yes, it is the 350Z that tops this list. Everything about it is conducive to being a great beginner drift car. They drift stock better than any other car on this list. The aftermarket is absolutely insane. They're super common. You can get the early examples for like $3,000 or $4,000 for like a stock version. They're really a super great platform. The 3.5 liter VQ35DE all the way to the HR, which was sold in the last models, is a great engine, great low end torque. The 07, 08 are going to be a little bit more expensive because they do have the better engine, but realistically, they're pretty much the same. And I could not recommend a 350 enough. You don't have to just listen to me. Plenty of drift racers will tell you that the 350Z is the best beginner drift car. Josh Robinson, a Formula D driver from Austin, he teaches drifting classes in two 350Zs. Fielding Shredder, who is a semi-pro drifting racer who's also on Netflix's Hyperdrive, he just bought a 350Z to be a secondary car so that he doesn't have to have this super hyper-focused drift car, and he can take something around that's a little bit more lax. And he got a 350Z. 350Z is like the best beginner drift car, and so that's how I'm ending this list. So that was the list. That's the top 5 best beginner drift cars that you can buy in the United States right now, all for around $5,000 or maybe a little bit less. And I could not recommend any of these cars enough. Go out and take a look at them, see your personal preference. The Miata might be a little bit too small for people that are really tall. The Mustang might be a little bit too big for people that are a little bit too short. So you just got to go out there, sit in them, see what you like. What do you like aesthetically too? Because if you hate getting in your drift car every time because you think it's butt ugly, you might not have as much fun. Drifting is about style, and substance. The whole point of the drifting experience is style. So just get out there and have fun with it. Go get a car, throw it around some corners, figure out if you even like to drift. And if you do, just keep going at it every day or any day that you can. And then eventually you may be, Chris Forsberg taking home, championship victories in Formula D. And when you do finally win a Formula D championship in one of the cars that I suggested, just get up on stage and be like, Thomas the Idiot told me to get the 350Z and I got it and now I'm winning. I love you. And then I'll come up on stage and we'll hug and you'll give me your prize money or something. I don't know. But with that all aside, have a great day. Keep on drifting. Keep on having fun, everybody. Stay safe. And I love you.